Here's something no one's told you, and it's not because they didn't know. It's because saying it out loud would unravel the entire story you've been sold about trust, about resilience, about moving on. The people who've been betrayed repeatedly don't become broken. They become someone else entirely. Not damaged, replaced. The person they were before the first betrayal no longer exists, and no amount of therapy language or forgiveness rituals is going to resurrect them. That person is dead, and the one who showed up in their place wasn't built to be happy. They were built to survive. This video isn't about getting over betrayal. It's about what happens to the architecture of a human identity when the foundation gets ripped out more than once. It's about the permanent rewiring that occurs in how you process trust, how you read people, how you move through every room you enter for the rest of your life. And if you've lived this, you already know exactly what I'm describing. You just didn't have the language for it yet. Most people think repeated betrayal makes you guarded. That's the word everyone reaches for, guarded. Like you just put up a wall, and behind that wall is the same person, waiting for someone safe enough to let in. That's a beautiful story. It's also structurally wrong. Being guarded implies a choice. It implies you're standing behind a door you could open if you wanted to. But that's not what happens when betrayal becomes a pattern. What happens is the door disappears. The room behind it gets remodeled. The person who would have opened that door doesn't live there anymore. You're not choosing to keep people out. You've become someone for whom letting people in no longer means what it used to mean. The operating system changed, and nobody asked your permission. The second wrong belief is even more insidious. It's the idea that repeated betrayal makes you weaker. That each time someone breaks your trust, you lose a piece of yourself, and eventually you're just this hollowed-out shell, walking around pretending to function. People love this narrative. It makes betrayal poetic. It makes the betrayed person a tragic figure. But it's backwards. Repeated betrayal doesn't hollow you out. It fills you with something dense and heavy and ruthlessly efficient. It fills you with pattern recognition so sharp it borders on paranoia, with emotional reflexes so fast they fire before your conscious mind even registers the threat. You didn't get weaker. You got replaced by something harder. And the tragedy isn't that you lost yourself. The tragedy is that the replacement is so good at surviving that no one, including you, notices what it cost. Here's where the real mechanism lives, and it's darker than you think. When you experience your first significant betrayal, something very specific happens in the brain. The model you built of that person, the internal representation of who they were and what they meant, doesn't just get updated. It collapses. And when it collapses, it takes a piece of your self-model with it. Because your identity isn't built in isolation. It's built in relation to others. You are in part who you are because of who you believe the people around you to be. When someone betrays you deeply, they don't just reveal who they are. They retroactively rewrite who you were during every moment you trusted them. Every memory gets reprocessed. Every conversation gets reinterpreted. You weren't just wrong about them. You were wrong about yourself for believing them. And that reprocessing, that retroactive contamination of your own history, is what actually changes you. Now, if this happens once, you can recover. The brain is remarkably plastic. You grieve, you adjust, you rebuild the model with better data. But when it happens twice, something fundamentally different occurs. The brain stops treating betrayal as an event and starts treating it as a category. It's no longer "this person betrayed me." It becomes "this is what people do." And once betrayal becomes a category rather than an event, your entire trust processing system gets restructured from the ground up. You don't evaluate individuals anymore. You evaluate threats. Every new person who enters your life isn't assessed for who they are. They're assessed for how they'll eventually leave. And here's the part that'll make you uncomfortable. You're usually right. Not because everyone's going to betray you, but because the pattern recognition you've developed is so finely tuned that you unconsciously select for, provoke, or interpret behavior in ways that confirm the model. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It's just designed for a world where everyone's a threat. Carl Jung described something he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the traits we bury because they're incompatible with the identity we want to present. But what happens with repeated betrayal is something Jung hinted at, but never fully articulated for this specific context. The betrayed person doesn't just develop a shadow. They become the shadow. The vigilance, the suspicion, the cold calculation that runs underneath every interaction, these aren't traits they're hiding. These become the primary operating system. The warmth, the openness, the willingness to be vulnerable, those become the shadow, the parts they hide, the parts they can barely access. You didn't just learn to protect yourself. You inverted your entire psychic structure. What was once your core became your mask, and what was once your defense became your core. And you did it so gradually, so necessarily, that you didn't even notice the inversion had happened. Let me make this concrete. Think about how you enter a room. Not a room full of strangers. That's easy. Everyone's on guard with strangers. Think about how you enter a room full of people who supposedly care about you. A family gathering, a friend's birthday, a partner's apartment. If you've been betrayed repeatedly, you don't walk into that room and relax. You walk in and you scan. You read micro-expressions before you take off your coat. You notice who greeted you and who didn't. You clock the tone of the first sentence someone says to you, and you file it. You're not doing this consciously. It's automatic. It's faster than thought. And the entire time you're performing a version of yourself that looks comfortable, that looks present, that looks like someone who trusts the people in this room. But underneath that performance, there's a machine running. And that machine is calculating exit strategies, cataloging inconsistencies, and maintaining a real-time threat assessment that never, ever turns off. That's not being guarded. That's being rebuilt. There's a specific behavioral signature that shows up in people who've been betrayed more than twice by people they deeply trusted. I call it preemptive withdrawal. It's not pulling away when things go wrong. It's pulling away when things go right. Because the pattern your brain has learned isn't people hurt you when they're angry or people hurt you when things are bad. The pattern is people hurt you after you relax. The betrayal always came after the good period. After you let your guard down. After you started to believe this one was different. So your nervous system learned the most devastating lesson a human being can learn. Safety is the signal that danger is coming. Comfort isn't comfort. It's the setup. And so you withdraw precisely at the moment most people would lean in. You create distance right when intimacy starts to feel real. Not because you don't want closeness, but because your body has learned that closeness is the thing that precedes destruction. And this is where it gets truly insidious, because this mechanism is invisible to the people around you. They don't see someone protecting themselves. They see someone who's emotionally unavailable, someone who's afraid of commitment, someone who self-sabotages. And when they name it that way, when they frame your survival architecture as a character flaw, they do something devastating without meaning to. They confirm the model. They become another person who didn't understand you. Another person who saw the surface and judged it. Another data point that says nobody will ever see what's actually happening inside you. And so the walls don't just stay up, they get reinforced. With every misread, every simplistic label, every well-meaning friend who says you just need to let people in. The architecture gets thicker, more sophisticated, more invisible. You don't get worse at trusting. You get better at performing trust while feeling none of it. There's another dimension to this that almost nobody talks about. Repeated betrayal doesn't just change how you see other people. It changes how you see yourself. Specifically, it splits your self-concept into two irreconcilable versions. There's the version of you that existed before, the one who trusted fully, who loved without calculation, who believed people when they said things. And there's the version of you that exists now, and you can't integrate them. You can't look back at who you were and feel compassion because that person's naivety is what got you hurt. But you can't fully embrace who you've become either, because this version of you is cold in ways that scare you sometimes. So you exist in a permanent state of internal exile, not at home in who you were, not at peace with who you are. Suspended between a self you can't return to and a self you didn't choose. This split is what makes repeated betrayal different from single-event trauma. A single betrayal can be metabolized. It hurts, it changes you, but you can eventually integrate the experience into a coherent narrative. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. I learned. I grew. That's a story that resolves. But when betrayal is a pattern, there's no resolution. Because the lesson isn't, I trusted the wrong person. The lesson is my ability to judge who to trust is fundamentally broken, and you can't integrate that. You can't build a coherent self-narrative around the conclusion that your own perception is unreliable. So instead, you build something else. You build a self that doesn't rely on perception at all. A self that operates on rules, on distance, on controlled exposure. You stop trusting your instincts and start trusting your protocols. And the protocols work. They keep you safe, but they also keep you locked inside a life that's organized entirely around the avoidance of pain rather than the pursuit of anything that matters. Now here's where I need you to look at yourself. Not the version you show people, the real one. The one reading this with a very specific feeling in their chest right now. Because if you've lived this, you're in one of two traps. And both of them feel like solutions. The first trap is total lockdown. You've decided, consciously or not, that the safest move is to need no one. You've built a life that functions entirely on self-sufficiency. You have people around you, maybe, but none of them are load-bearing. None of them hold any piece of you that would collapse something if they left. You've distributed your emotional weight so evenly across so many surface-level connections that no single person could hurt you even if they tried. And it works. You don't get betrayed anymore, but you also don't get reached. You're safe in the way that a person in solitary confinement is safe. Nothing can touch you, and nothing does. The second trap is the opposite, and it's more dangerous because it looks like progress. You've decided to be open again. You've forced yourself into vulnerability. Maybe you read a book. Maybe a therapist told you that trust is a practice. So you're practicing. You're sharing things. You're letting people closer. But underneath the performance of openness, the machine is still running. You're watching every reaction. You're testing every response. You're extending trust the way a general sends scouts into enemy territory. Not because he believes it's safe, but because he needs to know where the ambush is. And the person on the receiving end can feel it. They can feel that your vulnerability has conditions, that your openness has a timer, that you're not actually letting them in. You're letting them audition. And eventually, they pull away, not because they were going to betray you, but because being perpetually evaluated is exhausting. And when they pull away, your model gets confirmed again. The narrow path between these two traps isn't what you think it is. It's not about finding the right amount of trust. It's not about balance. The narrow path is this. You stop trying to trust people, and you start learning to trust your own response to betrayal. That's the shift. That's the entire shift. The reason you can't trust anyone isn't because people are untrustworthy. Some are, some aren't. The reason you can't trust anyone is because you don't trust yourself to survive it if they are. Every wall you've built, every protocol you've installed, every preemptive withdrawal you've executed, all of it is built on one belief. If it happens again, it'll destroy me. And as long as that belief is running, no amount of openness or vulnerability practice will change anything, because you're not afraid of them. You're afraid of what you'll become if they do what the others did. Here's the move, and it's small enough to start tonight. The next time you notice yourself pulling away from someone, not because they did something wrong, but because things feel too good, too close, too safe, I want you to do one thing. Name it out loud, not to them, to yourself. Say the words, I'm withdrawing because my body thinks safety means danger is coming. That's it. You don't have to override it. You don't have to force yourself to stay open. You don't have to perform bravery. You just name the mechanism while it's running. Here's why this works. Your survival architecture operates below conscious awareness. It's fast, it's automatic, and it doesn't consult you before it acts. But it has a weakness. It can't run undetected once you've named it. The moment you articulate what's happening, you create a gap between the reflex and the response. You don't eliminate the reflex. You probably never will. But you insert a moment of choice where there used to be only reaction. And in that moment, that tiny fracture between the impulse and the action, you get to decide. Not whether to trust them, whether to trust yourself, whether to trust that even if this goes wrong, you won't be destroyed. Because you've been destroyed before. And you're still here. That's not a platitude. That's evidence. You've already survived the thing you're afraid of. More than once. You do this enough times, something shifts. Not all at once, not dramatically, but the architecture starts to update. Not because you forced it, but because you gave it new data. Data that says, I can see the mechanism, I can name it. I can let it fire without letting it decide. And that's not trust in other people. That's something more foundational. That's trust in the thing that lives underneath all the protocols. The thing that was there before the first betrayal, and somehow, against all odds, is still there now. This video was never really about betrayal. It was about the person you became in response to it, and whether that person is who you actually are or just who you had to be. Because there's a version of you that existed before the first lie, before the first door that closed without warning, before the first time you realized the person you loved most was the person who understood you least, and that version isn't gone. It's not dead, it's not naive. It's buried under the most sophisticated defense system a human mind can build. And the defenses worked. They kept you alive. But alive isn't the same as present. And present isn't the same as free. You don't dismantle the walls by pretending they aren't there. You don't heal by performing openness for an audience of people who'll never understand what it cost you to stand in the room. You heal by recognizing that the walls were built by someone who didn't have a choice. And you do have a choice now, not to be who you were, but to stop letting who you had to become be the final word. The war isn't over, but you're no longer the person it happened to. You're the person who gets to decide what it meant.